after exposing that black boxes aren't for crash investigation, revealing $50,000 toilets hide Cold War destruction technology, and proving that life vests are designed to kill passengers for insurance profits, I discovered the most terrifying deception of all. The autopilot system you trust with your life was designed to replace human pilots. But when it fails, those same humans have forgotten how to fly. Modern pilots can't actually fly airplanes anymore. They've become button pushers who monitor computers, and when autopilot fails, passengers die because humans have forgotten the basics of aviation. Airlines know this, but hiring real pilots costs too much. What I'm about to reveal will shatter your faith in commercial aviation forever. Because the two people in that cockpit, the ones you're trusting with your life, may have never actually learned to fly the aircraft you're sitting in. Let's start with the shocking economics of modern pilot training. Airlines spend approximately $200,000 training each pilot. But here's what they don't tell you. 95% of that training is computer operation, not flying. Modern pilots learn to program autopilot systems, monitor digital displays, and follow checklists. The actual skill of flying, feeling the aircraft, understanding aerodynamics, manually controlling flight surfaces, has been systematically eliminated from training programs. Why? Because automation training costs 80% less than teaching real flying skills. Flight simulators running autopilot scenarios cost $500 per hour. Real aircraft requiring manual flying instruction cost $3,000 per hour. Airlines discovered they could mass-produce computer operators much cheaper than training actual pilots. The result is a generation of aviation professionals who can manage automated systems perfectly but panic when forced to actually fly the plane. When autopilot disconnects unexpectedly, many modern pilots experience what investigators call automation confusion. They literally don't know what to do with the controls in their hands. Former airline training captains described the problem in disturbing detail. New pilots arrive with thousands of hours logged, but virtually no hand-flying experience. They can program a flight management computer for complex approaches, but they can't maintain altitude manually without digital assistance. One retired training instructor explained, "I watched an experienced pilot with 5,000 flight hours struggle to maintain straight and level flight when I disabled his autopilot during a routine check. He had literally never learned to fly the airplane, only to monitor its computers." This skill degradation isn't limited to new pilots. Veterans who learned to fly manually decades ago report their hand-flying abilities have atrophied from disuse. Airlines actively discourage manual flying to reduce fuel costs and standardize procedures. The result is twofold disaster. Young pilots never learn real flying skills, and experienced pilots lose them. The aviation industry calls this automation dependency, but that's a euphemism. The accurate term is automation-induced incompetence, and it's killing passengers when technology fails. The most documented example of automation-induced pilot helplessness was Air France Flight 447, which crashed into the Atlantic Ocean in 2009, killing all 228 people aboard. The official investigation blamed pilot error, but internal documents reveal the truth was far more disturbing. When the aircraft's pitot tubes iced over, the autopilot disconnected as designed. Suddenly, 3 highly trained pilots found themselves flying a sophisticated aircraft manually for the first time in years. Their response was catastrophic. They pulled the nose up until the aircraft stalled, then continued pulling despite stall warnings, until the plane fell 35,000 feet into the ocean. Here's what investigators discovered, but never emphasized. These pilots had accumulated over 20,000 combined flight hours, but less than 200 hours of actual manual flying experience. When automation failed, they reverted to panic rather than training because they had never received real flying training. The most disturbing aspect? The crash was entirely preventable. Pushing the nose down and adding power would have recovered the aircraft within seconds. But these pilots had never learned basic stall recovery, because automation handles those situations automatically. The Boeing 737 MAX disasters reveal how automation dependency creates multiplication effects for technological failures. When the MCOS system malfunctioned, it triggered cascading problems that competent manual pilots could have easily resolved. But modern pilots, trained to trust automation completely, fought against their own aircraft instead of simply disconnecting the faulty system. Internal Boeing emails, revealed during congressional investigations, show engineers knew that modern pilots lacked the manual flying skills to override MCOS failures. One engineer wrote, "We're assuming pilots can fly, but they can't. They're system managers, not aviators." Boeing's solution wasn't better pilot training, it was more automation. The updated MCOS system includes additional computers to override pilot inputs, ensuring that human intervention becomes even less relevant. This creates a vicious cycle where each automation failure leads to more automation, further degrading human skills. Airlines supported this approach because retraining pilots for manual flying would cost billions and reduce operational efficiency. It's cheaper to install additional automated systems than to teach pilots how to actually fly their aircraft. Modern airline pilot training programs are sophisticated deceptions designed to produce computer operators who believe they're aviators. Students spend thousands of hours in simulators that never disconnect automation. They memorize checklists for managing automated systems, but never learn to feel how an aircraft behaves during real flight. Flight training schools openly market Zero to Airline Pilot in 18 months programs that focus exclusively on automation management. Students graduate with commercial pilot licenses having never performed a manual takeoff or landing in actual weather conditions. Their flying experience consists entirely of programming computers and monitoring digital displays. One flight instructor described the process. "We're creating video game players who think they're pilots. They can operate the autopilot flawlessly, but they have no understanding of how the aircraft actually flies. When reality intrudes, they're helpless." The most disturbing revelation? Airlines prefer these automation-dependent graduates because they're less likely to deviate from standard procedures. Real pilots who understand flight dynamics might question automated commands or override systems when they detect problems. Computer operators simply follow whatever the automation tells them to do. Airlines have discovered that automation-dependent pilots are not only cheaper to train, but also more profitable to operate. Human pilots who understand flight principles might choose less efficient but safer flight paths. They might land at alternate airports when conditions are marginal. They might refuse to fly aircraft with questionable maintenance. Automated system operators follow computer-generated flight plans regardless of actual conditions. They attempt approaches that real pilots would reject. They continue flights that experienced aviators would abort. This compliance generates billions in operational savings while transferring all risk to passengers. Insurance companies actively support this transition because automation reduces the frequency of small incidents caused by pilot decision-making. They're willing to accept occasional catastrophic accidents caused by automation failure because the overall claim rates are lower. It's the same calculation we've seen with safety equipment. Systematic risk is acceptable if it's profitable. This isn't just an American problem. It's a global aviation crisis. European airlines have eliminated manual flying requirements from training programs. Asian carriers use automation-dependent pilots exclusively on international routes. Even military aviation is transitioning to computer-operated systems that reduce pilot skills. The result is a worldwide generation of pilots who can't actually pilot aircraft. When automation fails simultaneously across multiple flights, the industry lacks the human expertise to handle manual recovery. We're creating a systemic vulnerability where technological failure could ground entire airline fleets because nobody knows how to fly without computers. International aviation authorities coordinate these policies through organizations that prioritize standardization over competence. They've decided that consistent automation management is more important than actual flying ability, creating global vulnerability to any widespread automation failure. Modern flight simulators contribute to the problem by making automation dependency seem like advanced skill. These devices perfectly replicate automated flight operations, but poorly simulate the physical sensations and decision-making requirements of manual flying. Pilots who excel in simulators often fail catastrophically when forced to fly real aircraft manually. Simulator training creates false confidence because automated systems work perfectly in the controlled environment. Pilots learn to trust automation completely because they've never experienced automation failure in realistic conditions. When real-world failures occur, their simulator-based training becomes counterproductive. The aviation industry markets simulator training as more advanced than aircraft-based instruction, when it's actually a cost reduction strategy that produces inferior pilots. Airlines save millions by avoiding aircraft rental, fuel costs, and insurance expenses associated with real flying instruction. Automation dependency creates additional safety risks through reduced pilot understanding of aircraft systems. Modern pilots can't diagnose mechanical problems because they don't understand how flight controls, engines, and systems actually work. They rely on computer diagnostics that may not detect intermittent failures or unusual conditions. Real pilots who learn manual flying developed intuitive understanding of aircraft behavior. They could detect engine problems through sound changes, identify control system issues through feel, and recognize weather hazards through visual cues. Modern computer operators miss these warning signs because they're monitoring digital displays instead of flying the aircraft. This creates a dangerous feedback loop where maintenance problems go undetected until they become catastrophic failures. Automation masks developing issues that experienced pilots would notice and address proactively. Aviation authorities that should protect passengers instead protect airline profits by approving training programs they know produce incompetent pilots. These agencies are staffed by former airline employees who maintain industry connections and financial incentives to approve cost reduction strategies. The FAA actively promotes automation dependency through regulations that require autopilot use during most flight operations. They justify this as safety improvement, but internal documents reveal the real motive: reducing training costs and standardizing operations for airline efficiency. International aviation organizations coordinate these policies to prevent competitive advantages for airlines that maintain real pilot training. They've created a global system where competent pilots are regulatory violations and automation dependency is mandatory compliance. Automation performs adequately in perfect conditions but fails catastrophically in real weather. Modern pilots trained exclusively on automation have never learned to handle turbulence, crosswinds, or visibility problems manually. When automated systems can't cope with weather conditions, these pilots lack the skills to take control. This creates seasonal safety variations where automation-dependent flights become significantly more dangerous during weather seasons. Airlines know this, but schedule flights based on automation capabilities rather than pilot skills, transferring weather-related risks entirely to passengers. The most disturbing aspect? Airlines actively discourage pilots from practicing manual flying in challenging conditions because it increases fuel costs and delays. They prefer automation-dependent operators who won't deviate from computer-generated procedures regardless of weather conditions. Current pilot training programs are producing even more automation-dependent graduates who will be completely helpless if technology fails. These future pilots learn exclusively on glass cockpit simulators with no exposure to basic flight instruments or manual control techniques. Airlines justify this progression as technological advancement, but it's actually systematic de-skilling designed to eliminate human expertise entirely. The goal is pilots who function as automated systems supervisors with no ability to intervene when technology fails. This creates a ticking time bomb where each new generation of pilots is less capable than the previous one. When major automation failures occur, the industry will lack the human expertise necessary for recovery. Every passenger who boards a commercial flight, believing their pilots can actually fly the aircraft, is the victim of systematic deception. Airlines market their crews as experienced professionals while knowing they're automation-dependent computer operators who panic when technology fails. The most tragic aspect is how this affects families. Parents choose airline travel believing professional pilots provide safety margins over other transportation modes. They don't realize their children's lives depend on automation systems operated by people who've never learned to fly. Flight crews maintain professional appearances and confident demeanor, but many privately acknowledge their limitations. They know they're not real pilots, but they're contractually prohibited from discussing their automation dependency with passengers. When real emergencies occur, engine failures, control system malfunctions, severe weather, modern pilots often make situations worse through automation-induced incompetence. They follow computer prompts instead of using judgment, apply checklist procedures regardless of actual conditions, and fight against aircraft behavior they don't understand. Emergency response training focuses on automation management rather than flying skills, creating pilots who can operate computers during crises but can't actually control aircraft. This leads to recoverable emergencies becoming fatal accidents because human operators lack the skills to take manual control. The aviation industry classifies these accidents as automation failures or pilot error, but they're actually training failures, systematic inadequacies designed to reduce costs while maintaining the illusion of safety. Autopilot didn't eliminate pilot error, it eliminated pilots. What we have now are automation supervisors who believe they're aviators but panic when forced to actually fly. Airlines created this system to reduce training costs and increase operational compliance, transferring all risks to passengers who believe they're protected by professional pilots. The two people in that cockpit may have never learned to fly the aircraft you're trusting with your life. They're computer operators trained to manage automated systems, not aviators capable of handling emergencies through skill and judgment. When technology fails, they become passengers in the cockpit, except passengers don't have access to flight controls. This isn't about technology versus tradition. It's about competence versus cost-cutting. Airlines eliminated pilot training to maximize profits while maintaining the fiction that passengers are protected by professional aviators. The result is systematic vulnerability disguised as technological advancement. The next time you hear the captain announce, "We'll be flying on autopilot today," remember what that really means. You're trusting your life to computer systems operated by people who've forgotten how to fly. And when those systems fail, those people become as helpless as you are. What's your take on this? Have you ever wondered what happens when pilots have to take manual control? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this investigation into aviation's human competency crisis opened your eyes, subscribe for more revelations about the industry's most dangerous deceptions.